Hello, and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of the hour. President Trump says he will tell European leaders at Davos that the US has to have Greenland. European allies and Greenland's Prime Minister reject the pressure after Trump threatens tariffs. President Trump calls Britain's decision to cede sovereignty of Diego Garcia to Mauritius an act of total weakness. He says the move highlights why the US must acquire Greenland for national security. Dozens of ISIS fighters escaped prison during heavy clashes between Syrian forces. Russia launches a drone and missile strike on Kyiv, cutting heating to over 5,600 apartment buildings in freezing weather. One person is killed, another wounded as critical infrastructure suffers further damage. Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev says he has arrived in Davos for the World Economic Forum. The summit includes US and Ukrainian delegations as diplomatic talks continue to end the war in Ukraine. France calls President Trump's threat of 200% tariffs on French wine and champagne unacceptable. Paris says tariff pressure will not influence its foreign policy decision. The site has no legal immunity, while UNRWA calls it an unprecedented attack. China confirms it has not been invited to join President Trump's Board of Peace initiative. The US has extended the offer to dozens of countries for a global conflict resolution effort. We have some breaking news coming in to start this hour, and Denmark's Prime Minister has issued a stern warning today, stating that if anyone were to initiate a trade war with Europe, Denmark would respond accordingly. Speaking at a press conference with the Prime Minister, backs the world order. Additionally, the Prime Minister firmly stated that Denmark would never negotiate on critical matters such as sovereignty, identity, borders and democracy, highlighting the nation's unwavering stance on these key issues. Joining us now is Dr. Asta Chadha, an Associate Professor of International Relations, joining us live from Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto, Japan. Thank you very much, Dr. Chadha. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Of course, this comes as this situation does indeed escalate, and dangers of a trade war between the United States and Europe have, of course, does Europe have any strength in a trade war with the United States?
I mean, this is strength in itself that European Union is trying to stand up, up to President Trump's announcement of increasing 10% tariffs. I mean, let's not forget that as dependent as Europeans might be in the wider global supply chains, which are largely dominated by US and China, between the US and Europe has been beneficial to both sides. It's not just that Europe has been seeking security out of this relationship. So this threat or the recent announcement of 10% tariffs, given the result that, the control of Greenland would not be easy to acquire for the United States. I mean, it seems that at least Europeans are both, as we heard earlier from the speeches of the European Commission president speaking, they are very, very firm on the fact that they will reciprocate with tariffs. And that, as we know, given the economic situation, whether it's in Europe or in the United States, it's not looking like a very good picture. I mean, for the longest time, they have Europeans and the Americans. The word, if we can trust the word, is either they accept US hegemony there or it would be taken by force. What is it that US would get out of that sort of a use of force? I mean, it is very, very unlikely that US is going to be left with many partners, because this is not just about maintaining a NATO alliance or maintaining its partners across the region, which, by the way, are also very critical for United States' own relationship. If it were to happen between Europe and America, what is the kind of signaling it will do to states like Russia and China that have for the longest time been accused of not respecting international law, not respecting global norms? So I think this overall, probably the Europeans, if they were to act individually, they do not have enough strength. But if they were to act as a bloc, they do have considerable economic strength. They do have also military resources, let's not forget. And President Macron mentioned this very recently in his meeting is in his earlier meetings with President Trump regarding Ukraine, when he stated that Europe has been contributing 60% through a combination of loans, grants, and military equipment. So Europe has been with states, and if it were to turn into a kind of a breakdown of trust of some sort, I think Europeans would want to stick together for their wider security, and that in itself would be a huge damage to United States to lose such an important ally in the Atlantic.
Indeed. Dr. Chadha, do stay with us as we move on to another related development. And President of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has warned the United States that imposing additional tariffs on European countries over Greenland would be a mistake. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, she stressed the importance of honouring trade deals, especially between long-standing allies. The European Union and the United States have agreed to a trade deal last July. And in politics, as in business, a deal is a deal. And when friends shake hands, it must mean something. Von der Leyen also made it clear that Europe's response to any escalation over Greenland will be unflinching, united and proportional. She highlighted Europe's commitment to Arctic security, adding that they are working on a package to support security efforts in the region. She also announced Europe's plans for a significant investment surge in Greenland, aligning with the US on shared security objectives in the Arctic. Let's have a look.
Consider the people of the United States not just our allies, but our friends. And plunging us into a downward spiral would only aid the very adversaries we are both so committed to keeping out of the strategic landscape. So our response will be unflinching, united and proportional. And this is why we are working on a package to support Arctic security. First principle, full solidarity with Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark. The sovereignty and integrity of their territory is non-negotiable.
Dr. Chadha joins us once again to discuss this. Of course, some strong words there from the European Commission President. A proportional response coming if the United States does, in fact, impose tariffs on these European countries on February the 1st. What does this say about Western unity right now, Dr. Chadha, and how do you think Moscow is looking at this?
Well, like you mentioned, these are very strong words, but I would go a step further and interpret her words. This is not just limited to reciprocal tariffs anymore. This is about breakdown of trust, as she clearly mentioned when she said that a handshake means a handshake and a deal is a deal. So this is about, we know that at the center of the core of this issue is the US's aspiration to control Greenland, largely, if I may use the word. And, pushing against that control are these European nations, specifically the 8 against whom President Trump recently announced an increase in tariffs. So the reciprocation, let's say, if it were to happen, would happen not just in the fact that, there could be retaliatory trade war in some way between Europe and America, but also this is a breach of trust. This would be seen as a breakdown of dialogue mechanisms. So probably Europeans are also going to roll back a lot of the presence that America has received over time. They're going to build up, like I mentioned earlier, they're already building up their defenses. They've already started investing way more into their security than they earlier had. We haven't seen much progress in the longest time in European Union's Indo-Pacific strategy. We might see some movement there as well. But the core of the issue, and I want to come here, is Greenland. And we must remember, Greenland in its own domestic politics for the longest time as an autonomous territory of Denmark, they have also played both sides. I remember back in 2018 or 19, there was an airport infrastructure that was being pitched, and China was also fighting to get that contract. And Denmark Denmark at that point had to step in, stop that deal because they didn't want the Chinese investment coming into Greenland so directly, and they had to fund it themselves. They had to provide the resources. So Greenland has these two very clear policies. One, they are going to play to their strengths when it comes to accepting or rejecting Chinese investment, which means Europeans would then have to build up defenses or build up capabilities in Greenland. That's how I interpret the idea of proportional, unified, and unflinching responses from Europe. And then lastly, let me also mention here, there is a very high possibility that Danish forces, European forces might get in some way deployed in or around Greenland, in some way ready to act. And, but I mean, whichever way this goes, this already looks very, very bleak to me that the dialogue mechanism has broken down and it is coming down from push to shove, specifically for very long-standing allies across the Euro-Atlantic.
Indeed, Dr. Chatter, do stay with us once again as we move on to our next story. And at the World Economic Forum in Davos, the Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng warned that the world cannot return to the law of the jungle. He emphasized that no single country should have privileges based on self-interest, as this undermines global stability. Lifeng criticized unilateral actions and trade pacts, highlighting how they disrupt the global trade order. He also pointed out the dangers of tariff wars, which he believes lead to the fragmentation of the global economy. He called for stronger support for free trade and inclusive economic globalization, stressing that multilateralism and free trade face serious challenges in today's geopolitical climate. Lifeng reaffirms China's commitment to supporting the liberalization and facilitation of trade and investment. His remarks come as tensions rise over global trade dynamics, with issues like the US push for Greenland and broader economic competition taking center stage in international discussions. Let's listen in to the statements.
丛林法治法则，各国都有权维护自身的正当权益。中国一贯重视以自身发展带动贸易伙伴共同繁荣，致力于做大全球经贸蛋糕。我们从不刻意追求贸易顺差，不仅愿意做世界工厂，更愿意做世界市场。但是很多时候是中国想买，对方不愿意卖，贸易受到泛安全化的影响。
Dr. Chatter joins us once again. Of course, the Chinese premier there directly addressing the United States without, of course, mentioning them by name. Do you think China here is defending global rules or just defending its own economic interests with these statements?
Thank you, Thomas. I would definitely go with the latter. What China is doing is very strategically trying to pitch itself as a very stable alternative to United States that is clearly seen here as unstable and untrustworthy, in that speech. Secondly, for the longest time, actually, if we remember, if we go back to the initial ideas of what Belt and Road Initiative used to signal, it used to be called One Belt, One Road or OBOR initiative. That was China's, step into how to promote digital connectivity, maritime connectivity, land-based connectivity for trade. And this is precise. I mean, even though several iterations of BRI did not really work very well for China in terms of economic, payback, but it did in some way help establish China as the other alternative to United States. And there couldn't be a better time than now for China to take the stage, try and pitch itself as that new upcoming power that is willing to, rather than escalating rivalry with other nations, is trying to show that they are trying to stabilize trade. But also what's very interesting is that why so much concern over international law and rule-based order or free trade now? And it becomes quite clear US actions in general do hurt China by a lot. We saw in a big question mark ever since US has, in US's own words, taken control of Venezuela, right? So Venezuela, that used to be one of those core energy security interests for China, now seem to be out of their hands. Similarly with Greenland deal, I mean, if US were to in some way secure the rare earth elements market that generates out of Greenland, China is the major player in that market once again, and that would break Chinese monopoly. And the third important point I'll quickly mention here is the fact that we are seeing how China has also carefully kind of stepped away from emphasizing only its US rivalry. I mean, I'm not talking only about the World Economic Forum, I'm looking at the larger picture here. They've tried to put way more emphasis into its relationship with the countries like Russia, that it has tried to, bring up its relationship with or deepen it in some way. But also India, we are hearing a lot of different stances coming out of China with regard to how it's trying to normalize, to a certain degree, its relationship with India. So I see all of this as a part of a larger strategic reckoning on China's part, wherein on one hand it benefits them to pointedly, make comments on how US is leading or is the leading cause of this breakdown of global international order and free trade.
Very much, as always, for taking the time. It is a great pleasure in speaking with you. We now move on, and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has stated that Russia will continue its trade and joint projects with Iran despite US threats to impose tariffs. This comes after US President Donald Trump had threatened on January the 12th that any country doing business with Iran would face a tariff rate of 25% on any trade with the US. Speaking at a news conference in Moscow, Lavrov made it very clear that Russia's economic dealings with Iran are determined by their mutual interests and not by external pressure. Let's take a listen in to the Russian foreign minister.
Ну, мы же торгуем-то с вами, вы и мы. Как мы решим, так и будет торговля развиваться. У нас есть хорошие планы с Исламской Республикой Иран. Не только в торговле, но и в инвестиционной сфере. Атомная станция Бушер активно расширяется. Идет проработка важнейшего отрезка. И я не вижу каких-либо причин, по которым мы или иранские друзья должны эти проекты останавливать. Да, Дональд Трамп, он применяет пошлины, тарифы в качестве инструментов политики. Всегда, когда односторонние принудительные меры задействуются в торгово-экономических отношениях, это говорит о том, что инициатор этих мер не вполне уверен в своих конкурентных способностях на мировых рынках.
Lavrov emphasized that the use of tariffs by President Donald Trump is a political tool and a sign of the US's insecurity in global markets. Russia sees no reason to halt these projects, which are central to its growing partnership with Iran. Peter Cardillo joins us now. He's a chief economist at Spartan Capitals in New York. Peter, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to have you on the program. How much leverage do these US tariffs really have over countries like Russia, of course, which of course is already sanctioned?
Yeah, well, tariffs do have some amount of leverage, but they also mean that, and this includes the United States, that the economies could slow down at a pace crawl, and as we've seen here in the United States. Inflation remaining sticky, and if these new tariffs are imposed over the Greenland geopolitical politics, obviously, if they are imposed for a sustained period of time, it's going to bring higher inflation here in the United States, and probably a dose of inflation in the global economy. So again, it goes back to the point that trade wars never really have any one clear positive economic outlook for anyone, and no one wins in a trade war. And of course, now with the situation with Iran, with Greenland, President Trump has said that he's going to oppose, at least on 8 nations, an extra tariff that could go as high as 25%. And we're seeing a trade war that's likely to intensify a trade war that could last perhaps more than that was expected on either sides, and retaliation from the EU and probably other countries as well. So it's not a good thing to have a trade war that is a long-lasting trade war. And hopefully, cooler heads will provide, and perhaps some solution can be achieved without imposing these strong tariffs.
Peter, as you've mentioned, it's not only Iran that has been the main reason for tariffs being imposed on countries' top trading partners. And now we, of course, see that main focal issue of Greenland, where the United States is placing that 10% tariff on NATO, 8 NATO allies. Is Washington overusing economic pressure as a foreign policy tool? Of course, Donald Trump has previously said that tariff is his favorite word, and he doesn't seem to be moving against the strategy anytime soon.
Well, let me say this. President Trump's he said many of times that tariffs are good. And he does have one point, and that point has been proven, that is a positive point. And that is that if you look at our trade deficit, that's come down tremendously. And if this tariff war continues and we collect and we continue to collect the monies that we have been, that trade deficit could actually turn into a positive. So that's the plus side of it. But of course, the negative side means slower economic growth, higher inflation, less consumer spending, and the possibility eventually of total isolation and a repeat that has happened in the past.
Okay, Peter, do stay with us as we move on to further updates from the United States. And Netflix has submitted an amended all-cash offer for Warner Brothers Discovery's studios and streaming units valued at $82.7 billion. The offer received unanimous approval from Warner Brothers' board without raising the original price. This move is part of a continuing bidding war for Warner Brothers' valuable TV and film studio assets. Netflix's offer comes after several rounds of bids from other companies, including Paramount, Skydance, Comcast, and Netflix itself. Paramount Skydance had previously made a hostile bid valued at $108.4 billion, which was rejected by Warner Brothers Discovery. Netflix's revised offer follows an earlier cash bid and has secured approval, marking a significant step in the ongoing negotiations. Peter, a big development here coming out of the United States. But why would Warner Brothers accept a lower bid when a higher one was already on the table? What's the difference between that all cash aspect?
Well, I think it's a question of, at this point, it might be a question of perhaps who might have a better grip on Warner Brothers, and perhaps maybe what's in the benefit for the corporate executives. But again, this bidding war at one point or another will reach a plateau that will be satisfying not only to the shareholders, but of course to the board members as well. And so we just have to wait and see. I would suspect that somewhere along the line, one of the two acquirees are likely to say enough is enough. The question is, at what price?
Yes, Peter Cardillo, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you, but unfortunately we have ran out of time. We now move over to the United Kingdom, and Prince Harry attended the Royal Courts of Justice for the second day of opening arguments in his legal case against UK tabloids. specifically suing Associated Newspapers Limited, the publisher of the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday, for privacy invasions. Alongside Harry, pop icon John and his husband David Furnish and 4 other high-profile figures are part of this case. Today, 3 of the 7 claimants were present in court, including Elizabeth Hurley and former MP Sir Simon Hughes. None of the claimants will be giving evidence today, with Prince Harry scheduled to be the first witness on Thursday. The case also centres on the issue of whether the claimants are too late to sue, as privacy cases typically must be filed within 6 years of the breach. The claimants argued that they only realised they had a potential case after 2016, despite the publisher's alleged concealment of its actions at the time. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.